Hi everybody, welcome to week 3 of Theory and Practice of Group Work. Starting to get into some of the exciting parts of youth work, which is talking about leadership, the kind of forming of groups, and the effectiveness of groups together. What makes a group effective as opposed to what makes a group not so effective. Hopefully you enjoyed listening to the podcast around the books around survival. I found it quite fascinating. I remember when I first heard it, but just listening through it again. And likewise, I hope you enjoyed the reading of chapter 2, particularly of the textbook. And really what I want to pick up on is the elements of the textbook first, and then the last bit of the podcast, and that certainly those two things too will form a fair bit of our workshop tomorrow. So just to pick up on the textbook in chapter 2, it talks about personal characteristics of an effective group leader, and as you kind of heard in the podcast, group leadership is a very, very, very important to the group's effectiveness. In the case of the podcast, I was talking about groups' very survival, or ability to survive and thrive, as opposed to fall in a heap and go Lord of the Flies, as they kind of talked about. The leader's role was very, very, very important in that. And Corey and Schneider pick up on a whole heap of traits that make a group leader quite effective. And first one is courage. And I think for me, anytime you put yourself as a leader of a group, it does require a certain amount of courage, because you put yourself out there up front, and you put yourself available for criticism and for even for people's evaluation of people towards you and judgment of people towards you. So to become a leader, put yourself out as a leader is quite a vulnerable place and requires a lot of courage. Also requires a willingness to model, that it's not do as I say, not as I do, but the other way around. We kind of know that people watch us and they look at the model that we present, not just what we tell them. So it's a willingness to get our hands dirty and model. Again, correlates with one of the areas that in terms of the survival podcast talks about, in terms of getting in there and allowing ourselves to share equally roles within that kind of setting. Also requires presence. That as a leader, you cannot be detached from the group that you are facilitating or that you are leading. That it requires you to be present with them, connected to them, interested in the group, wanting to know about them, wanting to know more than just the task at hand, but to grow in that kind of connection with them. One of the things I found with coaching a lot, that I've grown in that space, is that rather than just it's about the process and the skills and that kind of thing, that it also does require a presence. You need to be around the group in a number of different settings to earn the trust, to build the rapport and all those kind of things. And part of that is around goodwill, genuineness and caring. That as a leader, again, it's not just a driving people to do things, but it's around enveloping them with that sense of welfare, that you're concerned about their lives. You have goodwill, you're genuine with them, you care about them. There's also a belief in the process, the group process. As I sort of said in the first lecture, I think it was, the very mechanism for understanding or growth in a group setting is the process. So as you go through the process, it allows for personal growth and then also collective growth. But as a leader, then you need to actually also be open. There needs to be an openness, about what your strengths are, what your growth areas are, what your weaknesses are, and along with that, there needs to be, I guess, a non-defensiveness when you're actually coping with criticism. That there's nothing like breaking trust by being defensive the moment anyone criticizes you in any sort of way. I loved in the podcast how they talked about the leaders willing to give up their leadership. And in fact, at the very end, that was one of the things she talked about, was that the leader must be replaceable and accountable. And so there's, apart from being defensive, being quite open to even the question, am I the best person to lead this group through the stage of whatever they need to be going through. Also becoming aware of subtle culture issues. That there are actually things that are cultural, and that's cultural in the big sense. That you know, that's different from our values, the culture that we've grown up in. So it's being aware of our own culture as leaders, and then being able to pick up some subtleties that might exist around other culture within the group, that might give us an insight into I guess, yeah, why the group is either going in a certain direction, or why people are being affected in certain ways by the group dynamic and the group process. And then moving into, and again, this sort of relates, being able to identify with the client's pain. There will be times in a group where pain is experienced by group members, either by feeling left out, by feeling that you're not contributing in the way that they would like to, just through their own self-doubt at different times. And so being able to identify with that client's pain, or that group member's pain, is a very important part of the leadership of the group, to have that empathy, and the empathy, vulnerability that Brene Brown talked about. Such an important part to allow them to grow in the process. Also being aware of personal power, that as group leaders we do carry a personal power, and not to take that for granted, but to be highly aware of the power that we have, and again use it for positive for the group, not for ourselves. As opposed to negative, which becomes more so using it for ourselves and not the group. Sometimes power is necessary to be able to actually call the group into line, to be able to allow the group to go through, like again, survival situation, to be able to to get a leader is really important. So there is a need for personal power, but again, being aware of it, understanding it, not misusing it. Also stamina. Being a group leader can be incredibly draining. So there's a real need to commit to self-care when you're leading, being an effective group leader, because it takes time, it takes energy. You have to kind of be available for everybody. And that sometimes becomes that weight of expectation can become quite overwhelming. And so there's a need for self-care within that. How do I run the long race with the group and not kind of burn out and then make poor decisions, poor leadership, and or just leave, because I don't have the stamina to see it through the process. That requires an enormous amount of self-awareness, which we've talked quite a bit about within this class. We'll continue to challenge that because self-awareness is huge within that. Where are my limits? Where are my boundaries? Am I expendable? Probably not. So where are the points where I can give? Where are the points where I need to stop? All those kind of things. A high self-awareness. And along with that, I guess, really important traits are sense of humour and some inventiveness, some creativity. As a group leader, it's quite important to be able to see the light side of things and help others see the light side of things through a process that can often be difficult, and also see the creative side, that when when the roadblocks seem to be there, how do we push through those things? How do we become inventive? How do we find a different way around it? And then, of course, you got personal dedication and commitment. That's and I mean that's it kind of speaks for itself in that you have to commit to the process, and you have to dedicate to the process. It's no good setting up a process and then allowing the group, or just letting the group kind of meander along. It's about your own personal dedication, commitment to that journey, and seeing that journey through. The book goes on to talk about that sometimes the co-leader model can actually be really, really good in terms of working with a group. There's advantages and disadvantages of the co-leadership group. I'll let you go through that as your readings. And also that there's some research orientation to the practice as well. And we'll cover a little bit of that within the workshop around the co-leadership, because it can be quite a powerful thing to lead with somebody else, but there are certainly disadvantages of it at times as well. And certainly very clear, a lot of clarity is needed for that to actually work. And that goes also around the group counsellor as a professional. It goes through a whole lot of areas of the professional skills that you might need to use as a group facilitator, group leader, around empathising, facilitating, summarising, questioning, those kind of things. We'll pick up a little bit of that in the workshop in the team roles, the Belbin team roles kind area, and we'll explore that a little bit more. But certainly, yeah, there's some good reading in the readings as well. But I guess this is the final thing I wanted to pick up on was right at the end of the podcast. There was 13 things that Eleanor had picked up through her research and through her writing around what helps a group to survive, as opposed to go Lord of the Flies within that survival situation. And I'm just going to highlight them, but we're going to pick these up and look at it in more detail within the workshop. First one was toss the grog. We'll kind of talk about why that might be important. Number 2 was elect a leader. Immediately tell them that they're replaceable as well, was one of her points. So that leadership is really important. Number 3, as soon as possible, establish order and a routine. Make sure that you're keeping busy. Number 4, never allow the weak to die in order to save the strong. They talked about the survivor maths, which we'll talk a little bit about tomorrow again. But again, this is a survival situation. But think about this just in any group context as well. What does that mean? Never allow the weak to die in order for the strong to survive. Number 5, share resources and workload equally amongst survivors, regardless of rank. Just as we sort of said before, be willing to do your role, regardless of whether you're a leader or not. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go and dig the hole and that kind of thing. Shouldn't help out with cooking the dinner. That's part of that role modelling. Number 6, use a rotating work schedule to make sure that there is people both sharing the workload, the intensity of the workload, but also being able to participate, making sure that they can participate and feel like they're participating. Number 7, right in the middle, was probably where it belongs, communicate. Keep those lines of communication open. Such an important factor, and we'll talk specifically about communication tomorrow and how we do that. Number 8, stay busy, even if it seems pointless. Keep creating things to do. Don't become static. Keep the dynamic happening. Again, very important in survival, but also I think very important for effectiveness of group and group process. Number 9, the leader must be replaceable and accountable. We picked up on the replaceable up the top. They've repeated it twice, so it's obviously a very important thing, but the accountability of the leader is very important too. That keeps that power in check. Number 10, stop the group from fragmenting, going into factions. We've seen that in our own political process of recent times at national level. But stopping the group, picking up on where things start to work into factions, and stopping the group fragmenting at that point. Really, really important. Number 11, have a plan. And if that plan fails, have another plan. Keep coming up with a plan. You have to have some sort of guidance as to why you exist, what you're doing. And it doesn't matter if it fails, it's just a matter of then redoing it, resetting it up. Number 12, if one faction starts to dominate, stand up against them, particularly for the weak. So make sure that you're not allowing power from any faction that gets a bit more influence to be able to be abusive towards the rest of the group. So stand up against it. Very important factor. And number 13, fight the mindset of individual, or fight the individual mindset. I love the comment they made. We're communal creatures. We survive as a group. And I think, again, that's such an important factor when we start to think about how whatever group, whether it's survival or whether it's for some other purpose, how do we thrive? How do we become the most effective? And we certainly talked tomorrow a little bit and picked up in the slides about the move from individual mindset to collective mindset. Very important. So again, look forward to seeing you all tomorrow and going through those things within the workshop. And yeah, we'll talk soon.